The day before the divorce was scheduled to be finalized, I woke up with an odd sense of calm. Boston's morning light filtered through the half-drawn curtains, casting long shadows across the bedroom I'd soon leave behind. After 23 years of marriage to Richard, our relationship had withered into something unrecognizable, all stiff conversations and colder silences. I made myself coffee in the kitchen we'd renovated together 5 summers ago. The marble countertops that had once symbolized our success now felt like monuments to a failed partnership. I sipped slowly, watching the cardinal that visited our bird feeder every morning. At least some things remained predictable. "I'll be back late," Richard had texted last night. Another work emergency at his law firm, supposedly. I'd stopped questioning these absences months ago. What was the point? Tomorrow at 2 p.m., we'd sign the papers and officially end what had begun with such promise at St. Patrick's Cathedral all those years ago. The house felt especially hollow that morning. I wandered from room to room, touching furniture, remembering dinner parties and Christmas mornings. Our son Thomas had learned to walk across that living room floor. He was 30 now, married to Melissa for 3 years. They lived across town in Cambridge, building their own life while mine crumbled. By afternoon, I'd started packing the last of my personal items from the guest house where I'd been staying for the past 2 months. Richard had insisted I keep the main house until the divorce, a gesture of goodwill that rang hollow. I preferred the smaller space anyway, less emptiness to confront. I was wrapping my grandmother's teacups in newspaper when I noticed it, a wine glass on the kitchen counter with a perfect crimson lipstick imprint. Beside it lay a silk scarf, emerald green with tiny golden flowers. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake. Instead, a strange stillness settled over me as puzzle pieces clicked into horrible place. The lipstick wasn't mine. I wore only nude shades since turning 50 last year. And the scarf? I'd never seen it before, though it looked expensive, the kind of thing you'd gift someone special. I set down my grandmother's teacup and listened. The house wasn't as empty as I'd thought. From upstairs came the faint sound of laughter, a woman's voice, then Richard's deeper tone in response. My feet carried me up the stairs without conscious thought. Each step felt both impossibly slow and inevitable. I wasn't sneaking. They were too engrossed to hear my approach. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar, and through that narrow opening I saw them. Melissa, my daughter-in-law, my son's wife, her dark hair splayed across my pillows, her bare shoulders visible above the sheets. And Richard beside her, his arm draped possessively around her waist, whispering something that made her laugh again. The world didn't stop. Thunder didn't crash. I simply stood, committed the scene to memory, then turned and walked downstairs with measured steps. Outside, I sat on the patio chair where Richard and I had once watched summer sunsets. The betrayal crystallized inside me, transforming from shock to something harder, something clear and sharp-edged. I poured myself 3 fingers of the Macallan he saved for special occasions and watched twilight settle over our carefully landscaped garden. I called my friend Janet, but hung up before she answered. What would I even say? My husband is sleeping with our daughter-in-law? The words felt poisonous, impossible. My thoughts turned to Thomas. Did he know? Was he another victim in this, or somehow complicit? The possibility made me physically ill. As night fell completely, I moved from shock to calculation. Tomorrow's divorce meeting wasn't just about ending a marriage anymore. Richard and Melissa clearly had plans, and I'd bet anything those plans involved, taking me for everything I was worth while I crumbled from the humiliation. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I wouldn't scream or break down. Instead, I'd let them think they'd won, let them believe I was beaten. And then, when they least expected it, I'd show them exactly who they were dealing with. I finished my scotch and went inside to make some calls. The calm I'd felt that morning had transformed into something dangerous, a perfectly still surface hiding the depths of what I was capable of. They wanted to play games? Fine. But they'd soon learn I wasn't just a pawn to be sacrificed. The Copley Square office building loomed above me as I stepped out of my Uber. I'd chosen my navy Burberry suit carefully that morning. Power clothing for what would undoubtedly be a power play. The pearls at my neck had been Richard's 20th anniversary gift. Wearing them felt like armor. Inside, the law firm of Goldstein & Burke smelled of leather and money. Richard had suggested we use his colleague Frank Burke as our mediator, a friend doing us a favor. I'd agreed, knowing full well whose side Frank would take, but appearing naive served my purposes now. I was 10 minutes early. The receptionist, Diane, who'd sent us Christmas cards for years, couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Mrs. Harrison, they're waiting for you in conference room B." They, not just Richard then. "Thank you, Diane. How are the kids?" I asked, voice steady. "Growing too fast," she replied, relief flooding her face at the normal exchange. "Zach starts high school this fall." I smiled. "Time flies. Tell him congratulations." The walk down the hallway stretched before me. I heard voices inside the conference room, Richard's baritone, another feminine one that made my stomach clench. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Richard sat at the mahogany table, freshly shaven, wearing the charcoal suit I'd picked out last Christmas. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his Harvard class ring catching the light as he drummed his fingers impatiently. And there beside him, Melissa. My daughter-in-law wore an ivory silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, diamond studs gleaming at her ears. Diamonds Thomas had saved for months to buy her. Her presence wasn't even disguised as professional. She leaned toward Richard with the casual intimacy of ownership. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned over and kissed Richard's cheek, her eyes never leaving mine. Challenge accepted, I thought. "Elizabeth," Richard stood, all professional courtesy. "Thank you for being prompt." "Of course," I replied, setting my purse down. "Though I'm surprised to see Melissa here. Is Thomas joining us as well?" The momentary panic that crossed both their faces was almost worth the pain of being in the same room with them. "Thomas is busy with work," Melissa said smoothly. "I'm here as moral support for Richard. This is hard on everyone." Frank Burke entered then, saving me from having to respond. He was a florid man with expensive tastes and a reputation for ruthlessness in divorce proceedings. "Elizabeth, good to see you. Shall we begin?" I took a seat across from them, hands folded, wearing what my mother used to call my church smile. Polite, distant, revealing nothing. Frank slid a thick folder toward me. "Richard has been generous in his offer. The Harrison home on Beacon Hill remains his property, along with the Cape Cod vacation house. The investment portfolio will be liquidated, with 70% remaining with Richard as he built the practice that generated those funds. You'll receive a settlement of $750,000 and your personal effects. Given Massachusetts' equitable distribution laws, this is more than fair. More than fair. 23 years reduced to less than $1 million, while Richard kept property worth 10 times that amount." I opened the folder slowly, each page a fresh insult. They'd even listed my grandmother's silver as disputed property. I looked up to find both Richard and Melissa watching me intently. They expected tears, perhaps, a breakdown, begging. They'd clearly rehearsed this moment, the defeated wife, the triumphant new couple emerging from the ashes of my humiliation. "May I have some water?" I asked calmly. Frank looked surprised, but buzzed his assistant. When the water arrived, I took a long, deliberate sip. "I appreciate the effort that went into this proposal," I said finally. "But I'm afraid I'm not in the right headspace to sign anything today." Richard frowned. "Elizabeth, 3 days," I cut him off. "I'd like 3 days to review everything with clear eyes. Surely that's reasonable. After all, we're dissolving 2 decades of marriage." Frank looked to Richard, who hesitated before nodding. 3 days, but no changes to the core agreement." "Of course," I said, closing the folder. "I just need time to process everything. It's been overwhelming." Melissa's smile was predatory. "We understand, Elizabeth. Take the time you need." As I stood to leave, I caught sight of movement in the hallway through the glass wall. Thomas, his tall frame unmistakable, his expression confused as he spotted his wife sitting beside his father in a divorce proceeding she had no legal reason to attend. I slipped past them toward the door. "Thomas," I said softly as I passed him in the hallway. "I'm so sorry." His eyebrows knitted together. "Mom? What's going on? Why is Melissa here?" Behind me, I heard chairs scraping as Richard and Melissa realized Thomas had arrived. I touched my son's arm gently. "Ask them," I whispered. then continued walking. I didn't look back, but I heard Melissa's panicked, "Thomas!" as the elevator doors closed between us. Phase 1 complete, I thought. Now for the real work to begin. I checked into the Fairmont Copley Plaza under my maiden name, Liz Morgan. The hotel staff didn't blink at my credit card or lack of luggage, just another businesswoman passing through Boston. My phone buzzed incessantly. Richard, Thomas, even Melissa. I silenced them all and removed the battery for good measure. The suite overlooked the Boston Public Garden where Richard had proposed 24 years ago. I'd been 30 then, starry-eyed over the handsome lawyer 7 years my senior. Now, at 54, I felt simultaneously ancient and newborn, a strange rebirth through betrayal. I ordered room service and opened my laptop. The first call I made was to Patricia Winters, a divorce attorney I'd quietly consulted months ago when Richard's late nights had become suspicious. She'd given me her personal cell number, sensing even then that I might need emergency assistance. "They're trying to steamroll you," she said flatly after I explained the situation. "And the daughter-in-law's presence, that's just psychological warfare." "I need everything," I told her. "Not just a fair settlement. I want scorched earth." Patricia's silence spoke volumes. Finally, "You understand what that means? No going back." "I found them in our bed together," I said simply. "There's already no going back." We agreed to meet at her office early the next morning. My second call was to Marcus Bell, a digital investigator who specialized in financial forensics. He'd been a recommendation from my brother James, who worked in corporate security. I'd hired Marcus 3 months ago on a hunch, paying his substantial fee from the emergency account I'd maintained since my father died. "Mrs. Harrison," Marcus answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call." "You found something," I said. It wasn't a question. "More than something. When can we meet?" "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Patricia Winters' office on Boylston. I spent the rest of the evening compiling everything I'd gathered over the past 6 months. Bank statements showing large withdrawals from our joint accounts, credit card bills with suspicious charges, photographs of Richard entering hotels on nights he was supposedly working. I'd started collecting evidence when the distance between us had grown suspicious, never imagining the specific betrayal I'd uncover. Sleep eluded me that night. I stood at the window, watching the city lights, remembering the dinner parties we'd hosted, the charity galas, the vacations. Had Melissa been at those events, watching Richard, planning? She'd married Thomas 3 years ago after a whirlwind romance. Had it all been calculated? A way to get close to Richard's wealth? By morning, my grief had hardened into resolve. Patricia's office was sleek and modern. Nothing like the old money mahogany of Burke's firm. Marcus arrived precisely at 10, carrying a leather portfolio and an external hard drive. "Mrs. Harrison," he began once introductions were complete, "your instincts were correct. Your husband has been systematically moving assets for approximately 14 months. He laid out printouts in methodical rows. Bank transfers to offshore accounts, cash withdrawals, property purchased through shell companies. And most damning, a steady stream of payments to Melissa Cabot Harrison that predated her marriage to my son. She's been receiving money from him for nearly 5 years, Marcus explained, highlighting transactions. Initially smaller amounts, then increasing. The pattern suggests they've been involved since before she met your son." Patricia swore under her breath. "This isn't just an affair, it's premeditated fraud." The next revelation hit harder. Marcus pulled up records showing Melissa's substantial student loans, over $120,000 from her time at NYU, paid off in a single transaction from Richard's corporate expense account, categorized as legal consulting. "He paid her debts using firm money," Patricia said, eyebrows raised. "That's embezzlement." "There's more," Marcus continued. 3 vacations charged as business trips. Jewelry purchased on your household account, but delivered to an address in Cambridge, her previous apartment. And this, he pulled up property records for a condo in South Beach, Miami. Purchased 6 months ago through a limited liability company. Both their names are on the internal documents, though not on public record. I stared at the evidence of their betrayal, laid out in columns and rows of damning data. They were planning to take everything and run to Florida. "It appears so," Marcus confirmed. The timeline suggests they intended to wait until after the divorce was finalized. Patricia was already making notes. This changes everything. With evidence of financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, we can request a forensic accounting of all assets. Plus, Massachusetts still recognizes alienation of affection lawsuits. But I was thinking beyond lawsuits. Richard's entire career, his standing in Boston society, his reputation at the firm, all of it rested on his carefully cultivated image of integrity. The Bar Association took a particularly dim view of attorneys who misappropriated funds. "I want to destroy him publicly," I said quietly. "Not just take his money. I want everyone to know exactly who he is." Patricia exchanged glances with Marcus. "That's a different strategy. Less predictable." I nodded. "I have a friend, Lindsay Weber at Boston After Dark. She covers society scandals." "The tabloid?" Patricia looked skeptical. "They verify their sources rigorously, especially when the story involves prominent figures." Marcus nodded slowly. "With your permission, I can prepare a dossier, anonymized at first, but verifiable." For the next 2 days, we worked methodically. Patricia prepared legal documents while Marcus compiled evidence for Lindsay. I stayed in my hotel room, emerging only for these meetings. Thomas called 17 times. I finally texted him, "I need a few days. Please trust me." His response was immediate. "Something's wrong with Melissa. She moved out suddenly. Dad won't talk to me. What's happening?" My heart ached for him. "I'll explain everything soon. I promise." On the 3rd day, just hours before I was due to meet Richard and sign the divorce papers, I sent Lindsay everything. Photos, financial records, timeline. The bomb was primed. Now I just had to walk into that office and watch it explode. I arrived at Burke's office 15 minutes early, dressed in a simple black dress that had always made me feel confident. The receptionist, Diane, looked uncomfortable as she announced my arrival. This time I was shown to a smaller conference room, a subtle power play that made me smile internally. Richard was already there, drumming his fingers on the mahogany table. No Melissa today. His eyes were sharp, impatient. "You're early," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "Always was," I replied, setting my purse down and taking a seat across from him. "Isn't Frank joining us?" "He'll be here shortly." Richard finally looked at me. "Have you reviewed the papers?" "Thoroughly." I kept my face neutral, though my phone buzzed in my purse. Lindsay, most likely, confirming everything was ready. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I studied the man I'd spent half my life with. The silver at his temples I'd once found distinguished, the lines around his mouth that deepened when he was stressed, as they were now. Had I ever really known him? Frank Burke entered, breaking the tension. "Elizabeth, good to see you again. I trust you've had enough time to review the agreement?" I nodded, opening my own folder, not theirs. "Yes, thank you. I have a few questions before we proceed." Richard's phone chimed. Then again, and again. He frowned, glancing down. "Is something wrong?" I asked innocently. "Nothing important," he muttered, silencing his phone. But I noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped it. Frank cleared his throat. "You mentioned questions?" "Yes," I said, deliberately taking my time. "I was wondering about the Cape Cod property. When was it last appraised?" Richard's phone began ringing, not chiming with texts, but actually ringing. He glanced at the screen, his face draining of color. "I need to take this," he said abruptly, standing. As he stepped outside, Frank looked puzzled. "Perhaps we should wait." Richard's voice carried through the door. "What the hell do you mean it's everywhere?" A pause. "Who would—" Another pause. "Jesus Christ, damage control, now!" I checked my watch. Right on schedule. Frank's phone began buzzing next. He excused himself and stepped out, leaving me alone in the conference room. I pulled out my own phone and opened Twitter. The headline from Boston After Dark had already been shared thousands of times. "Prominent Boston attorney caught in scandalous affair with daughter-in-law. Financial fraud alleged." Lindsay had done excellent work. The article included blurred but recognizable photos of Richard and Melissa entering the South Beach property, financial documents showing the suspicious transactions, and quotes from sources close to the family. Comments were flooding in. each more outraged than the last. Local news stations had already picked up the story. The downfall of a prominent Boston attorney was too juicy to ignore. Richard burst back into the room, face contorted with rage. "What have you done?" he hissed. I smiled calmly. "I haven't done anything, Richard. The truth simply has a way of coming out. This is slander. I'll sue that trashy tabloid into oblivion." "It's only slander if it isn't true," I replied, standing. "And everything in that article is meticulously documented. Lindsay is very thorough. She had to be to publish something about a lawyer of your stature." Frank returned, ashen-faced. "Richard, the firm is calling an emergency board meeting. Apparently, several clients have already called demanding explanations." Richard looked like he might collapse. "This is insanity. Elizabeth, you need to issue a statement denying this immediately." I laughed, actually laughed. "Why would I do that? The truth is finally out. Isn't that refreshing?" My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Is it true? All of it?" I responded simply, "Yes. I'm so sorry." More calls were coming in. Richard's sister Grace, my friend Janet, neighbors. The story was spreading through Boston's tight-knit social circles like wildfire. I could almost hear the whispers at the country club, the gasps at dinner parties. Richard was on the phone with someone from his firm, his voice growing increasingly desperate. "Of course I can explain the Miami property." "No, those transfers were legitimate business expenses." Frank pulled him aside, murmuring urgently about damage control. I gathered my belongings calmly, tucking away the folder I'd brought, a folder that contained copies of everything I'd given Lindsay, plus the counter lawsuit Patricia had prepared. "I'll be leaving now," I announced. "I believe we're done here." Richard looked up, phone still pressed to his ear. "This isn't over," he threatened. "Actually, it is," I replied. "But the divorce proceedings are just beginning, with new terms, of course. Patricia Winters will be in touch with your team. Assuming you still have one after today." I walked out, head high, as Richard's phone continued to explode with notifications. In the lobby, I passed 3 partners from his firm rushing toward the elevator, their faces grim. Outside, a local news van was already parked at the curb. The bright spring sunshine felt like a spotlight as I walked to my waiting Uber. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath that didn't hurt my chest. The exposure wasn't just revenge, it was liberation. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal meetings and carefully worded press statements. I'd moved from the Fairmont to a rented apartment in Back Bay, a temporary haven while the storm raged. Patricia had filed our counter lawsuit, demanding full financial disclosure and a forensic accounting of all marital assets. The judge had frozen Richard's accounts pending investigation. The scandal had erupted exactly as I'd anticipated. Richard's law firm placed him on indefinite leave after 3 major clients withdrew their business. The Massachusetts Bar Association opened an ethics investigation. Melissa had vanished from social media, reportedly fleeing to her parents' home in Connecticut. Thomas came to see me on the 3rd day after the story broke. He sat in my sparse rental living room, hands clasped between his knees, looking both younger and older than his 30 years. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice hollow. I poured him tea from the service I'd brought from the guest house. "Would you have believed me without proof?" He stared into his cup. "I don't know. Maybe not." He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "How long? Do you know how long they were?" "At least 4 years," I said gently. "Before you even met her." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "So our entire relationship, our marriage, it was all just a cover. A way to stay close to him without raising suspicions. The truth was cruel, but necessary." Thomas stayed for hours that day. We talked more honestly than we had in years. He told me he'd found evidence of Melissa's betrayal when he confronted her. Texts, emails, gifts she couldn't explain. He'd filed for divorce the day after the story broke. "I'm sorry," I told him, "that you got caught in this." He shook his head. "Don't apologize. You didn't do this." A pause. "Dad wants to meet with you. He's been calling me, asking me to convince you." "Why would I meet with him now?" "He says he wants to settle, privately, before the court date." I considered this. Patricia had advised against any private meetings, but I wanted to see his face one more time, to watch him understand exactly what he'd lost. Suffolk County Courthouse steps, I decided. Public, neutral ground. Next Tuesday at noon. The day arrived bright and clear, one of those perfect Boston spring days that makes winter feel like a distant memory. I arrived early, watching tourists snap photos of the historic building while lawyers and clients hurried up and down the steps. I wore a simple cream pantsuit. Resurrection colors, I thought with grim amusement. Richard arrived 5 minutes late, looking haggard. His usual perfectly tailored suit hung loose on his frame, his face gaunt beneath a week's worth of stubble. Behind him, Melissa trailed like a shadow, sunglasses hiding her eyes despite the cloudy day. They both stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at where I stood. I descended slowly, feeling the weight of nearby gazes. A few people had recognized Richard from the news coverage. Smartphones were already lifting to capture whatever drama might unfold. "Elizabeth," Richard began, voice strained. "This has gone far enough." I studied him dispassionately. "Has it? The Bar Association doesn't seem to think so, neither does the IRS. He glanced nervously at the small crowd gathering nearby. "I've prepared a new settlement offer, very generous, more than fair." I smiled thinly. "I've brought something too." I handed him the blue folder Patricia had prepared. "My final terms." He opened it, scanning the contents with growing disbelief. "This is insane. You want the house, the Cape property, 70% of all assets, plus full disclosure of all hidden accounts," I finished for him, "and a formal admission of financial fraud to be submitted to the court." "I'll be ruined," he whispered. "You already are," I replied. "Your firm is conducting a full audit. The Bar Association has copies of everything. This offer is actually merciful compared to what they'll do." Melissa pushed her sunglasses up, revealing red-rimmed eyes. "Please," she said, her first word to me since that day in the conference room. "We never meant to get caught?" I cut her off. "Clearly. That's why you spent years planning, hiding money, manipulating my son. Was he just collateral damage in your grand plan?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Richard put a protective arm around her shoulders, a gesture that would have wounded me weeks ago, but now just seemed pathetic. "The terms are non-negotiable," I continued. "My attorney has copies of everything. You have 48 hours to accept, or we proceed to court." I turned to leave, then paused, looking back at them. "You know what the saddest part is? If you'd just asked for a divorce like a normal person, Richard, I would have given you one. All this destruction, you brought it on yourselves." As I walked away, I heard Richard call after me, voice breaking. "Elizabeth, please." I stopped and turned one last time. People were openly filming now, sensing drama worthy of sharing. In a clear voice that carried across the courthouse steps, I said, "You always told me good lawyers know when they've lost, Richard. Consider this case closed." The crowd parted as I walked through them, head high. Behind me, I heard someone murmur, "Isn't that the lawyer whose career just imploded?" Another voice replied, "Yeah, and that's the wife who took him down." I didn't look back again. The weight I'd carried for months, years perhaps, had finally lifted. Whatever happened next, I would face it standing tall, on my own terms. Autumn came to Boston with a blaze of color that seemed to mirror my own transformation. 5 months had passed since that final confrontation on the courthouse steps. Richard had accepted my terms 3 days later, not out of decency, but desperation. The Bar Association's investigation had uncovered even more financial improprieties than we'd found, and his former partners were distancing themselves rapidly. I'd moved into a renovated brownstone in South End, a neighborhood I'd always loved, but Richard had dismissed as transitional. The 3-story building had high ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and windows that caught the morning light in ways that made even rainy days feel bright. "It suits you," Janet said, helping me arrange bookshelves one Saturday morning. She'd been my rock through everything, offering her guest room those first chaotic weeks, listening to my late-night doubts without judgment. "It's nothing like the Beacon Hill house," I admitted, unpacking a box of novels I'd collected over decades. "Exactly why it's perfect," she replied. "No ghosts." She was right. I'd sold the Beacon Hill mansion for well above market value to a tech entrepreneur from California who didn't know or care about the scandal attached to its previous owner. The Cape House I kept, not out of sentiment, but because Thomas had asked me to. Some of my childhood memories there are still good, he'd said. Maybe someday I'll want to remember them. Thomas and I had dinner every Sunday now. His divorce from Melissa had finalized quickly, her lawyer advising her that fighting would only bring more painful details to light. He'd moved to a loft in Somerville near his architectural firm and thrown himself into work, designing the kind of sustainable buildings he'd always talked about but Richard had discouraged as impractical idealism. Dad called again, he mentioned during one of our dinners at a little Italian place in North End. He's moving to Chicago, taking a position at a friend's firm. I nodded, letting the information settle without emotional reaction. How do you feel about that? Thomas twirled pasta around his fork, thoughtful. Relieved, honestly. Having him in Boston was... I kept wondering if I'd run into them together. Melissa had disappeared from our orbits entirely. Last I'd heard, she'd returned to New York, her hometown. Sometimes I wondered if there had been warning signs I'd missed, clues that might have spared Thomas the pain of discovering his marriage was built on lies. But dwelling there served no purpose. Patricia had become both my attorney and friend through the months of legal negotiations. She'd helped me establish a trust with part of the settlement money, something for future grandchildren, should Thomas ever have a family. The rest I invested carefully, working with a financial advisor Patricia recommended. You're set for life, the advisor had told me after reviewing everything. The question is, what do you want that life to look like? It was a question I considered daily as I rebuilt my routines. I started volunteering at the Boston Public Library's literacy program 3 mornings a week, helping adult learners improve their reading skills. I joined a walking group that explored different neighborhoods each weekend. I took a pottery class and produced lopsided mugs that nonetheless held coffee perfectly well. Small pleasures became significant. Buying flowers without calculating whether Richard would think them extravagant, ordering dessert without enduring subtle comments about watching my figure, playing jazz on Sunday mornings when I used to keep the house quiet for his hangover recovery. You look younger, my brother James commented when he visited from Chicago that October. Happier. I feel lighter, I admitted, pouring us both bourbon on my rooftop deck as we watched the sunset paint the city skyline. Sometimes I wonder if I should feel more, I don't know, traumatized? Devastated? James studied me over his glass. You grieved that marriage for years before it officially ended. Maybe you're just finally free to acknowledge it's been over a long time. Perhaps he was right. The marriage I'd mourned wasn't the one that had exploded in scandal. It was the one that had faded years earlier, replaced by something hollow neither of us had been brave enough to name. On a crisp November morning, I received a letter from Richard's attorney. He wanted to discuss selling some jointly owned investment properties we'd overlooked in the settlement. The old me would have immediately called Patricia, anxious about what scheme he might be planning. Instead, I simply forwarded it to her with a note. No rush on this. I trust your judgment. Then I closed my laptop, put on my coat, and walked to the public garden. The trees were nearly bare now, their leaves carpeting the pathways in russet and gold. Couples strolled hand in hand, children chased squirrels, tourists snapped photos of the famous swan boats now stored for winter. I found a bench near the pond and sat, breathing in the crisp air. An elderly man nearby was feeding chickadees that landed boldly on his outstretched hand. He caught me watching and smiled. "Would you like to try?" he offered, extending the bag of seeds. They're remarkably trusting once they know you mean no harm. I hesitated only a moment before joining him. When the first tiny bird landed on my palm, its feet a whisper of contact, something in my chest expanded. Not happiness exactly, but possibility, the quiet certainty that whatever came next, I was ready for it. "Look at that," the man said approvingly. "They recognize kindred spirits." I smiled, watching the birds come and go freely. "Yes," I said, "I believe they do."